You have heard the name before.
Bosnia. Maybe on the news, a long time ago. Maybe in a history class for a single afternoon. Maybe never quite on purpose at all. Ask most people in the West what Bosnia is, and watch what happens. There is a pause. Then they reach for the one image they have. A war, somewhere in the 90s, rubble, and a word they are not certain how to pronounce. And then the file closes. It is a strange thing to do to a country, because Bosnia is not a rumor, it is not a footnote. It sits in the middle of Europe, closer to Vienna than Vienna is to Rome. People have lived on this land without a single break for more than 100,000 years. There are drawings on cave walls here older than most of the languages spoken on the continent today. And still, somehow, it keeps slipping off the map. In 1929, a king redrew the borders of his kingdom, and Bosnia simply vanished. Its name was struck from the map, and its land was divided among 4 new districts, as if the country had never been there at all. It was not the first time, it would not be the last. For most of its history, the world could not even agree on what to call it. For centuries, it was just Bosnia, one word, one place, until foreign administrators arrived and fixed a second half onto the name. The people who lived here were told again and again by one empire after another that they were not quite ready to govern themselves, that they were a frontier, an edge, the place where Europe ended and something else began. In the old heart of Sarajevo, there is a line set into the pavement. On one side of it, the street is Ottoman. Low domes, hammered copper, the smell of coffee roasting in an open shop. On the other side, within a single step, the street becomes Vienna. Pale stone, tall windows, the confidence of the 19th century. And carved into the ground between them is a small marker. One arrow points east, one arrow points west. You can stand with a foot in each. This is the exact spot where, for 1,000 years, the maps decided the world split in 2. So here's the question this film will follow. Why does a country that sits at the precise center of Europe get treated by Europe as if it stands outside it? How does a place this old, this layered, this alive, keep getting erased from the record? And what does it cost to refuse? The answer is written into the land itself. So that is where we begin. Look at Bosnia on a map, and the first thing you notice is the shape. It is almost a heart, a rough, tilted heart pressed into the top of the Balkan Peninsula, ringed on nearly every side by mountains. People here call it the heart-shaped land, and they do not mean it as a slogan. They mean the geography. The country is folded again and again by the Dinaric Alps, a wall of grey limestone that runs down the whole of it like a spine. Those mountains have always done 2 things at once. They shelter and they isolate. They made this a fortress for the people who lived in the valleys and a nightmare for every army that tried to hold it. They also very nearly cut the country off from the sea. Bosnia has a coastline, but only just. 20 kilometers of it, a thin sliver of the Adriatic at a town called Neum. That is the entire ocean the country owns. On either side of that narrow gap, the coast belongs to a neighbor. Bosnia looks at the sea through a keyhole. And yet, inside those mountain walls, there is water everywhere. The name of the country itself may come from it. Bosna, the river that gives the land its name, is thought to trace back to an old Illyrian word that simply meant running water. And the rivers here are not ordinary rivers. They run a color that does not look real, a hard, luminous turquoise, the blue of a gemstone held up to light. The Una in the northwest moves over stone terraces in wide green sheets, breaking into waterfalls that step down the valley one after another. The Neretva cuts south through Herzegovina toward the sea, cold and clear even in high summer. And the Drina in the east runs a green so deep it looks solid. That river, the Drina, is more than water. It is one of the oldest borders on Earth. Nearly 2,000 years ago, when the Roman Empire split itself into an eastern half and a western half, the line they drew ran close to this valley. Later, the Drina divided the Ottoman world from the Austro-Hungarian one. Two empires, two alphabets, two ways of imagining the world, facing each other across a single green river. Bosnia did not sit beside that fault line. Bosnia sat on top of it. To understand what that did to the place, you have to go down into deep time. Because before there were empires here, there were people, and they left proof. Near the town of Stolac in the south, there is a hill called Diorson. 2,000 years ago, it was a city, built by an Illyrian tribe who cut enormous blocks of stone and fitted them together without mortar. Walls so precise, they have held their shape for 2 millennia. The people who built it traded with the Greeks. They minted their own coins. They were here long before Rome ever arrived. And when Rome did arrive, it did what Rome always did. It built roads. It opened mines. It threaded this rugged interior into a network that reached all the way to the Mediterranean. For a few centuries, the mountains of Bosnia shipped silver and lead to an empire that stretched across 3 continents. Then Rome receded, and the Slavs came down into the valleys, and something new began to grow, something that for a while belonged to no one but itself. By the 12th century, a distinct Bosnian state had taken shape in these mountains. It had its own rulers, men with titles like Ban and King, names like Kulin and Tvrtko. One of the oldest things that survives from that state is a single sheet of writing. It is a charter issued by Ban Kulin in the year 1189, a trade agreement with the merchant city of Dubrovnik down on the coast. It is written in an old Slavic hand, and it opens with the ruler's own name, promising safe passage and fair dealing to any trader who came into his land. It does not sound like much, a medieval trade deal, 800 years old. But think about what it proves. 8 centuries ago, this was already a state, with a named ruler writing its own documents, making its own agreements with the wider world, in its own words. Bosnians today treat that charter almost as a birth certificate, proof, on parchment, that the country was governing itself and speaking for itself long before any empire arrived to insist that it could not. And it had something stranger and rarer than a crown. It had its own church. The Bosnian Church answered to no one, not to Rome in the west, not to Constantinople in the east. In an age when all of Europe was being pulled into one of 2 great religious orbits, the people of this small mountain kingdom carved out a third path, a Christianity of their own, independent, unaligned, deeply suspicious of outside authority. Their neighbors called them heretics. The people here called themselves simply the good Bosnians. For nearly 3 centuries, that independence held. They left their dead beneath enormous carved stones. You can still find them scattered across the countryside, in fields and on high passes and along old roads. They are called stečci, great blocks of limestone, some the size of a small room, carved with strange and beautiful images. A hunter and his bow, a ring of figures holding hands in a dance. A raised hand, palm open, reaching out of the stone across 600 years. There are around 60,000 of them still standing in Bosnia and the lands around it. And here is the thing that makes them extraordinary. They were shared. The same kind of stone, carved in the same style, marks the graves of Catholic dead and Orthodox dead, and the followers of the old Bosnian Church all together. In a Europe that was tearing itself apart over exactly these differences, the people of this land buried their dead side by side, under the same symbols. The stones do not care who prayed which way, they just stand there, in the grass, keeping a promise about how to live that most of the continent had already forgotten. That is the Bosnia that existed before the empires came, old, self-governing, quietly certain of itself. It did not last. In 1463, the Ottoman Empire crosses the mountains and the Kingdom of Bosnia falls. The last king is captured, the independent church dissolves. One by one, the fortresses are taken until only a handful hold out in the far corners of the land. The final capital, a town called Jajce, wedged into a gorge with a waterfall pouring through its very center, holds on for another 60 years. When it falls at last, in the early 1500s, the medieval Bosnian state is finished. But conquest is not the same as erasure, and what the Ottomans did next is one of the most misunderstood chapters in the country's whole story. They did not empty the land, they rebuilt it. Over the next 4 centuries, a large part of the local population converted to Islam. Not overnight, not by the sword, whatever the later legends said. It took more than 100 years for Muslims to become a majority here, and it happened the way most large changes happen. Slowly. For a mix of reasons, because aligning with the ruling faith opened doors, lowered taxes, offered a way up in the world. The result was something Europe had almost nowhere else. A Slavic people, speaking a Slavic language, keeping Slavic customs, who were Muslim, and living right alongside them in the same towns, on the same streets, Orthodox Christians and Catholics, and a community of Jews who had just arrived from the other end of the continent. Because in the same decade, the Ottomans were consolidating this land, Spain was expelling its Jews. In 1492, Spain expelled its Jews, and Portugal soon followed. Tens of thousands of people, perhaps 100,000, we may never know the true number, cast out at the end of the 15th century. Many of them made their way east into the Ottoman lands, which offered them something Christian Europe would not: a place to live. A number of them settled here in Sarajevo and stayed for 4.5 centuries, speaking their old Spanish, keeping their own quarter in the bazaar. And so a single Bosnian city came to hold, within a few hundred meters of one another, a great mosque, an Orthodox church, a Catholic cathedral, and a synagogue. The world would eventually give Sarajevo a nickname for this: the Jerusalem of Europe. The man who built much of that city has a name worth remembering: Gazi Husrev Beg, a 16th century governor, the son of a Bosnian mother and an Ottoman father, who poured a fortune into a single town. He built the great mosque that still anchors the old city. He built a covered market, a bezistan, a long stone hall of shops that traders still work in today. He built a school, a bathhouse, a soup kitchen for the poor, and a library that would grow over the centuries into one of the richest collections of manuscripts in this part of the world. And he tied it all together with an old idea called a waqf, an endowment, a machine for turning wealth into a city that would keep running long after its founder was gone. He built so much and refused so firmly to fund anything outside the market district that he shaped the physical heart of Sarajevo almost single-handedly. Stand in that heart today, in the district called Bashjashia, and it is still alive. Coppersmiths still hammer bowls and pots by hand, the sound ringing off the stone. Old men play chess with pieces the size of forearms, and everywhere, in tiny cups, there is coffee. Bosnian coffee is not a drink you order and carry away. It is a ritual, and it has rules. The beans are ground fine as dust. The water is heated in a small copper pot called a jezva, brought just to the edge of boiling, then held back. A little foam is spooned into each cup first, then the coffee, and beside it, a single cube of sugar and a small square of something sweet. You do not gulp it. You sit with it. You let it cool. You talk. To be handed a coffee here is to be told, without words, that you have time, and that you are welcome to spend some of it here. And no one here lets you sit with a coffee for long before food arrives. The most famous of it is cevapi, small grilled fingers of minced meat, 10 to a plate, tucked steaming into a soft flat bread with raw onion and a spoon of soured cream. Every town swears its own is the best, and the argument is genuinely serious. There is burek, a coil of paper-thin pastry wound around meat or cheese or spinach and baked until it shatters. There is thick, clotted cream called kaymak, and honey, and stews cooked slowly in clay pots buried in coals. It is food built for sharing and for staying. Nothing about a Bosnian table is designed to be quick. The whole point is that you are still there an hour later, that the plates keep coming, that leaving too soon would be a small insult. Hospitality here is not a gesture, it is closer to a rule. There is a music that goes with it too. It is called sevda, slow, aching, beautiful songs, sung in a voice that seems to lean into its own sorrow. The word itself carries a meaning that does not quite translate, a sweet ache, a longing you would not give up even if you could. For centuries, sevda has been the private soundtrack of this country, and Sarajevo became the place where it was recorded and carried out into the wider world. All of this, the coffee, the songs, the four faiths within a stone's throw, the copper and the calligraphy, this is what 400 years of Ottoman rule actually built here. Not a barracks on the edge of Europe, a crossroads. One of the most genuinely mixed societies the continent has ever produced. And the Ottoman world did not stop at Sarajevo. It ran south into Herzegovina, where the country changes its face entirely. The Green Mountains give way to pale stone and hard sun, to vineyards and fig trees, and a light that feels borrowed from the Mediterranean just over the hills. This is the other Bosnia, the warm one, and the Ottomans left some of their finest work scattered across it. At a place called Blagaj, a whole river is born out of a cliff. The Buna does not seep up from the ground the way most rivers do. It comes roaring out of the base of a 200-meter rock wall, fully formed, cold and clear, from a cave that runs back into the mountain further than anyone has ever traced. And right there, at the mouth of it, built onto the water's edge beneath the cliff, stands a small, white dervish lodge, more than 500 years old. Sufi mystics chose this spot for the same reason travelers still come to it. There are few places on Earth where the meeting of water and stone feels quite so much like a held breath. Not far away, the Trebizond River throws itself over a wide curtain of rock at the Krevitsa Falls, tumbling 25 meters into a pool the color of jade. There is a gentle local legend behind the name. It means roughly the little cow, after a cow that is said to have fallen from the cliff above and been found impossibly alive at the bottom. A small, kind joke of a story for a place that looks like the edge of paradise. And above the Neretva, the old town of Pochitelj climbs a hillside in steps of honey-colored stone, a fortress and a minaret and a tangle of Ottoman houses stacked one above another, almost unchanged in 400 years. Further south, Trebinje wraps its old quarter around a square shaded by ancient plane trees and grows some of the oldest wine in the region on the sun-baked slopes around it. These are not ruins behind glass. People live in them, drink coffee in them, raise children in them. The past here is simply where everyone happens to live. But if you want to reach the soul of this country, you go back to the rivers and to a single bridge in the east. Over the Green Drina, at a town called Visegrad, there is an old stone bridge with 11 arches, raised in the 1570s on the order of a man named Mehmed Pasha Sokolovic. His story is the country's story in miniature. He was born in a Bosnian village, a Christian boy, and as a child, he was taken from his family under an Ottoman practice that gathered up sons from the conquered lands and carried them off to serve the empire. He could have vanished into it like tens of thousands of others. Instead, he rose and kept rising until he stood at the very top. Grand Vizier, the second most powerful man in one of the largest empires on earth. And near the end of his life, he reached back to the river of his childhood and built a bridge across it. 4 centuries later, a writer named Ivo Andrić sat down to tell the story of that bridge. He had been born in this land himself, near Travnik, in a country whose map kept being redrawn beneath his feet. And in his great novel, he used the single stone bridge at Visegrad to carry 400 years of Bosnian history. Every empire and faith and generation that crossed it, coming and going, living and dying, all of them passing over the same stones. In 1961, that book won him the Nobel Prize for Literature. It is the deepest thing this country keeps trying to say about itself, that it is not one bank of the river or the other. It is the bridge, the crossing, the place in between, where the whole traffic of the world is always passing through. Hold on to that, because it is about to matter more than anything. And then, in the space of a single generation, the whole world it belonged to began to fall apart. In 1878, the great powers of Europe met in Berlin to carve up the failing Ottoman Empire, and they handed Bosnia to Austria-Hungary. The people here were not asked. The Ottomans, still on paper, owned the land. But it was the Austro-Hungarians who now marched in, and they did not march in easily. It took over 150,000 troops and months of hard fighting through these mountains and a bloody street battle for Sarajevo itself before the new rulers held the country. Once they did, They set about dragging Bosnia, almost overnight, into the modern world. They built railways through the gorges. They opened factories and mines. They laid out grand stone boulevards beside the Ottoman lanes so that the city grew a second face. And in a detail that says everything about how they saw the place, they used Sarajevo as a testing ground. The first electric tramway in the whole empire ran here on these streets before it ever ran in Vienna. The imperial capital tried out its future on Bosnia first. But the same empire that brought the trams brought something far more dangerous. It brought the age of nationalism. Because now the old mixed society had a new question forced onto it. In an age when every people was supposed to have its own nation, what were the people of Bosnia? The Catholics began to look toward Croatia. The Orthodox began to look towards Serbia. And the Muslims, the Bosniaks, stood in the middle, claimed by no one, belonging to a country the map kept insisting did not exist. The pressure built for 30 years, and then, on a single morning, it broke. The 28th of June, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, rides through Sarajevo in an open car. A 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip steps forward on a street corner near a small stone bridge and fires twice. The Archduke dies. His wife dies. And within 6 weeks, the great empires of Europe are at war with one another. A war that will kill more than 16 million people and pull down 4 empires and redraw the map of the world. It is the one moment from Bosnia that the whole world remembers. And notice how it remembers it. Not as something that happened to Bosnia, as the place where somebody else's war began. The trigger, the spark, the street corner. The country becomes, in the world's memory, not a country at all, but a location, the scene of an event. Even when Bosnia is at the center of history, it is filed under someone else's name. After that war, the empire that had ruled here collapsed, and Bosnia was folded into a new country, a kingdom of South Slavs that would soon call itself Yugoslavia. And that is when the map erased it. In 1929, the borders were redrawn, the name was struck off, and the land was split among districts named for rivers. On paper, for a time, Bosnia was simply gone. It came back. It always comes back. After a Second World War, a new leader stitched Yugoslavia together again, and this time, Bosnia was one of its 6 republics, whole once more, with its name restored. That leader, Josip Broz Tito, ruled under a single promise, endlessly repeated: brotherhood and unity. Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks living side by side, one people under one state. And in 1971, that state did something the empires never had. It formally recognized the Bosniaks, the country's Muslims, as a nation in their own right, equal to Serbs and Croats. After centuries of being told they were a leftover, a category, a people who did not quite fit, they were written into the record at last, under their own name. And for decades in Bosnia, it seemed to hold. The country became a kind of showcase for the whole idea, a place where the mix worked, where a Muslim and an Orthodox Christian and a Catholic might share a building, a workplace, a marriage. The stones in the fields, the old shared graves, seemed to have kept their promise after all. The high point came in 1984. The Winter Olympics arrived in Sarajevo. The world came to these mountains, to Bjelosnica and Jahorina, the same peaks that shelter the old villages, and watched skiers and skaters compete beneath the minarets and the church towers. For 2 weeks, the country that Europe kept forgetting was on every television on Earth. and it was radiant. Hold that image for a moment. The lights, the crowds, the flags. A city at ease with itself, showing the world what 1,000 years of crossroads could build. Because the film needs you to see it before we go where it goes next. But first, we leave the cities entirely, because there is another Bosnia, one that has almost nothing to do with history, and the outside world knows about it even less. In the far southeast, against the border with Montenegro, there is a forest. It is called Peručica, and it is one of only 2 true primeval forests left in all of Europe. The other is far away, in Ukraine. Everywhere else on the continent, over the centuries, the old forests were cut. Here, in this one hidden valley, sheltered by mountains too steep and too remote to reach, the forest was left alone. And so it kept growing, the way forests grew before there were people to stop them. The trees here are beech and fir, and some of them are more than 400 years old, rising over 60 meters, taller than a 20-story building. Nothing is cleared, nothing is planted. When a giant falls, it is left where it lands, and out of its slow decay, 100 new lives begin. There are foresters and scientists who travel across the continent just to stand in it, because there is almost nowhere else they can see what a European forest is actually supposed to look like. People here call it simply the last jungle. At its heart, a waterfall drops more than 70 meters into the trees, a thin white thread falling through the green, and almost no one on Earth has ever seen it. And this forest is not empty. The Dinaric Mountains hold something that has vanished from almost all of the rest of Europe. Not one large predator, but all of them, together in the same living system. There are around 1,000 brown bears in this country, real bears, wild bears, moving through these same forests, leaving prints in the mud of the trails. There are perhaps 400 wolves, one of the last strongholds of the wolf anywhere in Europe. And moving between them, rarest of all, the lynx. A ghost of a cat, spotted and silent, so scarce now that its Balkan kind is one of the most endangered animals on the continent, clinging on in exactly these ranges. On the high ridges above the tree line, chamois pick their way across ground that would kill a person. Overhead, golden eagles turn and griffon vultures ride the warm air rising off the gorges, birds with wings the span of a doorway. This is not a zoo, and it is not a park with a gift shop. It is one of the last places in Europe where the whole machine of the wild still runs on its own. And below the ground, it gets stranger still. The rock here is limestone, and water has been dissolving it for millions of years, hollowing out caves that run for miles beneath the hills. In one of them, in Herzegovina, there lives a creature that should not be possible. It is called the Olm. It is a salamander, pale and blind, the color of old ivory, with feathery pink gills and skin so translucent you can nearly see through it. It lives its entire life in total darkness, in cold water, in caves. It can go years without eating. It can live for close to 100 years. And because the people who found it long ago had never seen anything like it, they decided it must be a baby dragon, washed up out of the deep places of the earth. That cave, called Vjetronica, is thought to be the single most biodiverse cave on the planet. More than 200 kinds of animal have been recorded inside it, and a remarkable number of them live nowhere else in the world. Nowhere. Just here, in the dark, under the mountains of a country the map keeps forgetting. And the strangeness does not stay underground. In the clear, cold rivers, there is a trout, the soft-mouthed trout, that swims in these karst waters and in almost no others on Earth. On the harsh, wind-scoured slopes of the higher peaks grows a pine tree, the Bosnian pine, twisted and enduring, rooted in bare rock where nothing else will hold. People here point to it as a kind of self-portrait, a living thing that grows exactly where it should not be able to and refuses to let go. And the wild here is not only in the high forests, it is in the wetlands too. In the south, where the karst rivers slow and spread before they reach the sea, there is a marsh called Hutovo Blato, and in the cold months it fills with wings. More than 240 kinds of bird have been recorded there, resting and feeding on their long journeys down the Adriatic coast. Pygmy cormorants, herons, ducks in the tens of thousands, a wintering ground that ranks among the most important on this side of the continent. At dawn, on the still water, the sound of it is astonishing. And on a windswept plateau in the west, there are horses that answer to no one. Around 800 wild horses roam free on the slopes of a mountain called Sin-Kar, and the great open field below it, descended from working animals that were simply turned loose decades ago when machines took over their labor. Now, they run untended across some of the emptiest grassland in Europe, foaling on their own, surviving the winters on their own, a herd that belongs to the land rather than to any person. All of this in a country that owns just 20 kilometers of coastline, a single narrow window onto the sea, and behind it, folded into the mountains, one of the richest and wildest interiors left anywhere on the continent, hidden in plain sight at the center of everything. So the country is one of the last wild places in Europe, and one of the oldest inhabited places in Europe, and one of the most religiously woven places in Europe. All of it at once, all of it here, and almost none of it is what the world pictures when it hears the name. To find the oldest human answer to this landscape, you have to climb. High above Sarajevo, near the top of a mountain, there is a village called Lukomir. It is the highest permanently inhabited village in the country, nearly 1,500 meters up, perched on the lip of a canyon that drops 800 meters straight down. Around 50 stone houses cluster together against the wind, their roofs made of cherry wood shingles, their walls thick, their windows small, everything built to survive a mountain winter that seals the village off from the world for half the year. People have lived up here for at least 600 years, and the proof is scattered right among the houses. Stetschi, the old carved tombstones dropped into the grass beside the homes of the living, the dead of the 15th century sharing the village with the families of today. For most of that time, life here barely changed. The shepherds moved their flocks up to the high meadows in summer, exactly as their ancestors did. The women still knit the thick wool socks and vests by hand, in patterns passed down through generations. Electricity did not reach the village until the 1960s. There is no shop, no school, no doctor. And when a visitor climbs all the way up, more often than not, they are met by an old shepherd sitting on a rock, whittling a stick, cracking a dry joke, who will wave them over and put a coffee in their hands. It would be easy to call a place like this lost in time. The people who live there would laugh at you for it. They are not preserving anything. They are just living the way that this particular mountain has always asked them to. And every autumn, most of them come back down to the towns and cities below. And every spring, a handful of families climb back up to the flocks and the meadows and the graves. That is the country the world does not see. Ancient, wild, mixed, alive, poured out across mountains and rivers and villages that most maps never bother to name. Now we have to talk about how the world nearly unmade it. Because the mix, the coexistence, the crossroads, all of it was built on a fragile agreement. And in the early 1990s, that agreement came apart. Yugoslavia was dying, its leader was long dead, its economy was collapsing, and the old promise of brotherhood and unity was being replaced, republic by republic, with a colder and more dangerous idea that each people should have its own land, its own pure state, and that anyone who did not belong was in the way. In the spring of 1992, Bosnia voted for independence, and the war came down on it almost at once. It found Sarajevo first.
In April of that year,
Forces took up positions in the mountains that ring the city, the same beautiful mountains that had hosted the Olympics 8 years before. And they turned those heights into a firing line. For the next 3.5 years, the city below was surrounded and cut off. It lasted 1,425 days. It was the longest siege of a capital city in modern history, longer than the siege of Leningrad, more than 3 times as long as the battle for Stalingrad. And what made it different was what it was aimed at. It was aimed at the idea of the city itself. The shells fell on markets, on trams, on people waiting in line for water and bread. Snipers fired down the open streets, and they targeted, deliberately, the places that made Sarajevo what it was. The National Library, the great treasury of the country's manuscripts and records, was set alight and burned. Something close to 2 million books and documents went up in a single night, and residents ran through the streets under fire, trying to carry armfuls of them to safety. There is a word that scholars later used for this: the killing of a city. Not just the killing of people, but the deliberate destruction of the shared, mixed, common life that a city holds. If you cannot force people to live apart, you destroy the places that prove they ever lived together. And yet, through all of it, Sarajevo refused to stop being Sarajevo. Newspapers kept printing in basements by candlelight. Musicians kept playing. A film festival was held under siege. People kept crossing the lines to see one another, kept sharing what little they had, kept insisting under fire that the mixed city was worth the risk of living in. It was its own kind of defiance, the refusal to be simplified. The war reached into every corner of the country, and in the summer of 1995, in a town in the east called Srebrenica, it produced the single worst atrocity Europe had seen since the Second World War. Thousands of men and boys were separated from their families and killed in the space of a few days in a place that had been declared a safe zone under the protection of the world. It was genocide. The courts have called it that plainly, and this film will call it that too. Let it sit there. Some things do not get a softer word, and they do not get a hopeful sentence to follow them. They get the truth, and then silence. The bridge fell in the autumn of 1993. To understand what that meant, you have to go back 400 years to the town of Mostar and to the single most beautiful thing the Ottomans ever built in this land. In 1566, after 9 years of work, a stone bridge was completed over the green Neretva River. It was designed by an architect named Mimar Hayruddin, a student of the greatest builder of the age, and it was unlike anything around it. A single arch of white limestone thin and impossibly high, leaping the river in one clean line, 24 meters above the water at its peak. There is a story about the day they took the scaffolding away. They say the architect did not trust his own creation, that he was so certain the arch would collapse the moment the supports were pulled, so certain the span was too thin and too high to stand, that he prepared his own grave and dressed for his own funeral, and left the town rather than watch it fall. It did not fall. It stood for 427 years. It became the soul of the town. The town itself was named for it, for the keepers who guarded the bridge, the Mostari. Generation after generation of young men proved themselves by climbing onto the parapet and diving from the top, 24 meters down, into the cold green water, a tradition older than most of the countries watching it today. And on the morning of the 9th of November, 1993, they shelled it until it broke. A 17-year-old boy was filming when it happened. He said that through the viewfinder, everything looked black and white, like a dream, and that he kept thinking if he just took his eye away from the camera, the bridge would still be there. It was not there. It slid into the river and was gone. Think about what it means to shell a bridge. A bridge is not a barracks. It holds no army. It fires no gun. Its only purpose is to let people cross from one side to the other, to join two halves of a town, two banks of a river, into one place. To destroy the bridge was to destroy the crossing, to say, with high explosive, that the two sides should never have been joined at all, that the whole idea of Bosnia, the crossroads, the mixing, the coming and going, was the thing that had to die. It was the erasure made physical, the oldest lie about this country turned into rubble in a river. And here is where the film has been going the whole time. They rebuilt it. When the war ended, the people of Mostar and a coalition from around the world decided that the bridge would rise again. Not a modern copy, not a steel replacement, the same bridge. They went back to the same quarry the Ottoman builders had used 4 centuries before and cut the same white limestone. They dredged the original stones out of the riverbed and studied how they had been shaped. They used the old techniques, the old geometry, the old refusal to let anything but stone hold stone. Divers, engineers, and stonemasons worked for years to raise a single arch across a single river. In the summer of 2004, the bridge was finished, and a young man from Mostar climbed onto the new parapet, in the same spot his grandfather might have stood, and dove 24 meters into the Neretva, exactly as they had done for 450 years. The crossing was open again. The two sides of the town were one town again. The fresh-cut limestone came out of the quarry bright white. Over the years, it will weather and fade to grey until it matches the old photographs, until you cannot tell, standing on it, which centuries the stone remembers. That is the point. The bridge does not want to look new. It wants to look like it was never gone. This is the answer to the question we started with. How does a country keep getting erased, and what does it cost to refuse? The refusal looks like this. It looks like men in the water lifting drowned stones. It looks like the same quarry, the same arch, the same dive. It looks like a whole country deciding that the thing someone tried hardest to destroy is the exact thing they will build again first. None of that means the story ends happily. It does not. The peace that stopped the war also froze the country in place. To end the fighting, the world drew new internal lines and split Bosnia into two entities, 2 administrations layered over one small nation, a system so complicated it can barely make a decision. The wounds are not healed. The politics are exhausting. The young people leave in enormous numbers for Germany, for Austria, for anywhere with more room to breathe. And every year, the mountain villages grow a little emptier. A place can survive being erased and still be tired. Bosnia is both. And yet, go up to Lukomir in the summer, and the families are still there, moving the flocks, pouring the coffee, sitting among the 600-year-old stones. Walk into the forest at Peručica, and it is still growing exactly as it did before any empire drew a line near it. The bears are still in the hills. The Olm is still in the dark. The turquoise rivers are still running down out of the mountains toward their thin keyhole of sea. And in Sarajevo, that brass marker is still set into the pavement. 1 arrow east, 1 arrow west, and every day people step across it without a second thought, as if standing at the center of the world were the most ordinary thing to do, which for them it is. In the summer of 2026, something happened that would have seemed impossible in the worst of those years. Bosnia stood on the largest stage there is. Its football team walked out at the World Cup in front of a global audience of hundreds of millions, wearing the name of the country across their chests. A country a fraction the size of most of its rivals, from a land the world kept filing under other names, cheered by crowds who a generation ago knew it only from footage of a siege. The country that Europe pretends does not exist, there it was, loud and stubborn and impossible to look away from. Maybe that is what this place has always been trying to say. Through the shared graves in the fields and the 4 faiths within a stone's throw, and the impossible thin arch of the bridge, and the stone cut twice from the same quarry across 400 years. Not, remember us. Something harder than that. We are still here. We were always here. You were the ones who looked away. This has been Bosnia, the heart-shaped land at the center of a continent that keeps forgetting it exists. Take a breath, stay a while. And the next time you hear the name, you will know that there was always so much more to find.